This is Suzanne Kenney, and you're listening to the Crime and Canvas podcast. In episode 15, we discussed breaking the gatekeeper and ending the 36-year silence. Today, in episode 16, we're talking about the $30 million lawsuit versus the $3 billion silence. I have sent out my newsletters since 2021. The recipients, I added them. I built my targeted email list. As time has gone by, more have been added. In December of 2025 was when Harvard and the Attorney General of Massachusetts was added. And in January of 2026, Boston College was added, and WBUR was added in March of 2026. I have the analytics. I know who opens and reads, what they click, etc. I wonder what keeps them silent. For many of them, I imagine they believe in this 35-year journey, but simply don't know how to help against such massive institutions. For others monitoring my newsletters, I know their silence is an active choice to protect the corruption. Regardless of why they are quiet, the reality is undeniable. The story is true, and I'm not backing down. It deserves the light of day, and it deserves to be known. How does a billionaire simply walk away from the FBI's #1 art crime? How does Frederick R. Koch orchestrate a cover-up following the murder of Robert Donati and end up safely tucked away in a Florida flea market while the world looks the other way? His world turned upside down because it landed him at murder. Both of his parents disinherited him 30 years apart, his mother, Mary, having passed away just 1 year prior to his arrival in Florida. Between her publicly known disinheritance, the art crimes he committed, and the murder of his longtime partner in crime, his plans were crumbling. In a moment of madness, he burned down his storage warehouse in London. Turning to his brother William, who was winning the America's Cup at the time and had no time for these antics, Frederick was tucked away in Okeechobee, Florida, just 45 minutes from his brother's home in Palm Beach. Why did he need to be tucked away? With Donati murdered, was the billionaire afraid the mafia was after him next? Or was he the one who ended Donati's life? This unraveling brought him to a flea market booth in that little town, where he happened upon a lady with the same name as his mother, Mary. Tucked into a quiet little town, he found a way to make the chaos seem better again. That moment is what I'm trying to share with you. Do you truly believe that moment and all the years of covering up these crimes deserve to stay in the silence? Should Anthony Amore continue to run a museum he isn't qualified to run, write books about crimes he has no clue about, and create a database of art crimes to find patterns he's actually ignoring? If you recall, February 11th, 2012 was the day I visited with former FBI agent Robert Whitman at an art event in West Palm Beach where the Koch brothers were present. You can listen to the full details of this visit in episode 5 of my podcast at crimeandcanvaspodcast.com. I was there presenting my mother's art list, items sold to her by Frederick R. Koch. According to the media, just 1 day earlier, on February 10th, 2012, the FBI was finding the Gentile art list. I solved the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum art heist in June of 2012. I matched the museum's art list to my mother's art list. The very first time I read it, by the time I was done reading it, I knew why my mother's story was such a mystery. I knew why this billionaire had visited with her. I also knew in that moment I was going to struggle with being heard. I had no clue that 15 years later I would still be struggling. But giving up was never an option. While others chose the comfort of the silence, I chose the duty of persistence, a marathon that has now led to more than 140 days, as of this podcast, of institutional silence. Years later, after solving the art heist, Fox News received my binder, the very day Anthony Moore announced his state run in 2018. My timeline proves a pattern of Anthony Moore reacting to my journey of sharing my mother's story. You can view the timeline at the crimeandcanvaspodcast.com website and click on the evidence link in the top navigation. My journey has been going since 1991 when my mother first shared stories about this man selling her artwork at the flea market and his grand stories of a life she couldn't imagine. It's a 35-year journey of persistence. The sheer scale of this story makes it hard to believe. So, should it remain in the silence? If you had the opportunity to stand up for this story, would you continue to stand? Would you understand the gravity of it staying in the silence? It's easy to let the silence remain because the story is so large. But what happens when you realize the wall of silence is bigger than the story itself? How could any of you walk away? We are more than 140 days past my December 1st, 2025 formal notice of breach of fiduciary duty served to Harvard University and the Attorney General of Massachusetts. The review phase is over. We have moved into a phase of documented surveillance where we all know who I have logged as opens on this record. To those who have been monitoring this record from the halls of Harvard, the offices of the Attorney General, the boardrooms of the museum, and the investigative desks of the media, the review phase is officially over. For more than 140 days, you have maintained a silence that speaks volumes. When you account for the podcasts, newsletters, and TikToks where names have been named and motives detailed, the lack of a cease and desist is a forensic admission. Anthony Moore and the institutional gatekeepers at Harvard University and the AG's office have had every opportunity to refute this multi-generational audit, and they choose instead to watch. Let's not forget Boston College, Cambridge University, Art Loss Register, Christie's, Sotheby's, Lloyd's of London. The list goes on. For the media, from the newsrooms of WBUR, NPR, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, to the desks at the BBC, CNN, NBC, Daily Mail, and Fox News, the review phase is over for you as well. Your internal opens and clicks prove that you've been monitoring this 35-year journey while waiting for an institutional permission slip to report the truth. By choosing to watch without reporting, you have helped maintain the managed mystery that protects billionaire interests at the expense of the law. Let's not forget the very agency tasked with solving this case, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. They're on the list, they are reading, they are watching, and they are choosing to remain silent instead of helping. Every year, I watch as they continue to face the cameras and say, "We are still trying to solve it. We are asking for tips." Do you know how frustrating it is to watch that performance? They are publicly begging the world for leads while secretly monitoring the very multi generational audit that solves it. It is pure theater designed to keep the public looking for ghosts. And the theater extends to their experts. Robert Whitman, the founder of the FBI's National Art Crime Team, is also on my analytics list. He's opening these emails, he's reading the newsletters. I stood next to him in West Palm Beach on February 11th, 2012, and I published that exact encounter in my book. If a civilian were fabricating stories about a decorated former FBI agent, he would have issued a cease and desist immediately to protect his legacy. But he hasn't. He remains completely silent because he knows the timeline is real and he knows exactly who else was in the room that day. I might be a nobody, but I finally have a whole lot of somebodies listening. Speaking of a nobody, the nobody mandate has launched. It was built on the budget of a nobody, but it carries the weight of a 35-year, multi-generational audit that will not be outweighed. This journey will continue at a turtle pace, the same relentless 15-year marathon of a daughter refusing to give up on her mother's truth. The gatekeepers have had their turn to manage the mystery. Now it is time to mandate the truth. Visit thenobodymandate.com, where persistence is a duty. That silence is a choice. But the silence of the institutions is nothing compared to the silence of the billionaire. If you follow the history of the Koch family, you know that William Koch famously spent upwards of $30 million litigating a $5 million grievance over counterfeit wine. He didn't spend that money to recoup his losses, he spent it to establish dominance. He wanted to send a message to the world that he has unlimited resources and zero hesitation to weaponize the legal system. He famously warned the media that if they printed something he didn't like, maybe like my mother's story, he would unleash his badgers on them. He uses the court as a weapon of intimidation to protect his narrative. And for the institutional media, that fear has worked perfectly. It has kept them completely under his control. But it hasn't stopped me. Because while he has the billions of dollars and a fleet of badgers, I have the truth, and truth does not bow to billionaires. Yet, here I am. For years, I have publicly accused William Koch of being a co-conspirator in the cover-up of the FBI's #1 art crime. I have explicitly detailed how he tucked his brother, Frederick R. Koch, away in Okeechobee, Florida, just 45 minutes from his own home in Palm Beach. I have tied his family directly to the cover-up following the murder of Robert Donati. I haven't just whispered this. I have broadcast it across 15 podcast episodes, well, now 16, posted it on TikTok, emailed it directly to the highest legal offices in Massachusetts, and published it permanently in my book, Crime and Canvas, which has been available globally on Amazon since October of 2022. William Koch sues over fake wine. I am accusing his family of a multi-billion-dollar criminal cover-up of the FBI's #1 art crime. So, I have to ask, where are my badgers? If what I am saying is a fabrication, a man with William Koch's litigious track record and massive ego would have crushed me with a defamation lawsuit on day one, simply to prove he could. He would have used every legal tool at his disposal to block my mother's story and silence my efforts. And I know that he knows. I have the paper trail and the witnesses to prove it. If you want proof that the Koch corporate empire has been fully aware of my investigation for over a decade, you can view the formal 2011 response I received from Koch Industries on the evidence tab of the website at crimeandcanvaspodcast.com. But it doesn't just stop at the corporate email. It crosses over into physical proximity. On February 11th, 2012, I stood at an art event in West Palm Beach alongside former FBI agent Robert Whitman, presenting my mother's art list. William Koch was at that exact same event. The FBI was there, the Koch brothers were there, and the evidence was on the table. Yet, even with a documented corporate paper trail and physical proximity to the investigation, he hasn't made a move. There's no lawsuit. There's no cease and desist. There are no badgers at my door. Why? Because in a legal system, truth is an absolute defense. William Koch's high-priced legal team knows that if they sue me for defamation, the case enters a phase called discovery. Discovery means I gain the legal right to subpoena his records. I would be able to demand his personal correspondence, his travel logs, his financial records, and his communications regarding his brother Frederick during that exact 1991 1992 timeline. He would have to sit for a deposition under oath. He hasn't spared me out of kindness. He backed down because his attorneys ran the risk assessment and realized my chain of custody is bulletproof. They know that dragging me into a courtroom would force them to legally unlock doors they have kept deadbolted for 36 years. That would force them to admit on public record that Frederick R. Koch is the biggest art criminal in history, and that Suzanne Kenney, a nobody from Florida, solved it from her mother's flea market story. He knows my mother's story is true. Harvard knows it is true. The AG knows it is true. The FBI knows it is true. They thought their wall of silence would be enough to starve me out. They were wrong. The Badgers aren't coming because the Badgers only attack when they know they can win. They cannot win against the truth. I am going to end with stating, let me be very clear. I am not an armchair detective. I am a whistleblower with firsthand art encounters from 1991 and 1992 involving my mother. Art encounters 45 minutes from Palm Beach. I didn't set out to solve an art heist. I set out to find the man who visited and sold my mother the artwork. It's not just one person's isolated experience. It is a family legacy that spans from a flea market in Florida all the way to the highest offices of Harvard University. I am so proud to stand up for the truth that everyone else is too afraid to touch. Standing with Mary, standing with Isabella. Visit crimeandcanvaspodcast.com to read the timeline for yourself and sign the change.org petition. And remember, if you're going through a similar struggle and you have a voice that needs to be heard, visit uhv.news. I started uhv.news because every voice matters. It is a place I created for others going through similar struggles or taking the time to praise someone in their community. Thank you for joining me on the Crime and Canvas podcast. This is Suzanne Kenney. I'm grateful for your time and your willingness to hear this story. Let's always remember the truth is still the truth, even if no one believes it, or even if you try to ignore it.